Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Can you thumbs up or folks can hear me okay and can see my screen? Looks good. Okay. So yeah, thanks so much for participating in this call today, particularly with the very difficult times that we are facing. We appreciate your participation. I'll introduce myself quickly and then ask Julia to do the same, but I'm Andrew Vaughan. I am with TNTP, been with TNTP for about 8 years. Before joining TNTP, I worked with the Louisiana Department of Education. I actually live in Louisiana. I live in Abita Springs, Louisiana. I've been in Louisiana for about 25 years. Still have this English accent, but I'm working on that. And I'd like to ask my colleague Julia to introduce herself too.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Julia Pearson. I live in North Carolina and I'm from North Carolina, but have been working in Louisiana for a few years now in my time at TNTP. And before TNTP, I worked at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and was also a middle school science teacher.
Great, thank you, Julia. So we have quite a lot to get through today. We're excited to share some of the best practices and frameworks that we've been using for virtual recruitment, selection, and hiring teachers. We'll do that at a fairly high level, but our hope is that we'll be able to work with you more directly on some of these components. In today's session, we'll also provide a bit more detail on preparing all teachers, new hires and current teachers for the 2021 school year. Few housekeeping tips. I think chat has been enabled for this call, which is great. We do want to hear from you, but there's only 2 of us, so we want to make sure that we're able to manage those questions. And there are some strategic points throughout the slide deck where we'll ask you to respond using the chat. And there'll also be a question and answer session at the end. So there'll be time to ask questions. So real quick, these are the things that we'll cover today. So many of you are familiar with TNTP. Many of you won't be. So we'll provide a little bit of an introduction there. And then we'll dig into some best practices in a virtual environment. We'll also then focus a lot more on preparing teachers for the potential scenarios of 2021, the school year 2021. And we're very excited to have a teacher panel with us today that we'll introduce in a bit. One of the really important things, and we'll stress this throughout, is that we believe it's really essential to be asking and listening to stakeholders as we navigate this process. And so we'll have opportunities to hear from teachers on how they feel teachers can be best prepared for the unprecedented school year we have ahead. Okay, so TNTP, it's an acronym that we use now, but it used to be the New Teacher Project, if you were wondering what those letters stood for. We're an organization, a nonprofit that's been in existence for about, over 20 years now. We've been working with schools and communities across the country, and our focus is on ending educational inequity, providing access and opportunities to students so that they can reach all students so that they can reach their potential. We do that in 3 ways. Number 1 is to look at opportunities to expand access for students so that all students get access to diverse, effective teachers, strong instruction, and engaging classroom experiences. The second thing we focus on is authentically partnering with communities. Again, listening to communities, listening to students, teachers, school leaders, community members, to ensure that their voices are loud and clear in the process and that their concerns and needs really inform our actions. And the third thing we do is hopefully inspire a national conversation on key issues such as educational inequity, access to excellent education for all students, and our most recent report, The Opportunity Myth, really focused on that, and some of you may have read that or heard about that, or actually experienced the presentation on that. So a little bit about TNTP. Nationally, more specifically to Louisiana, we've actually been in the state or been working with partners across the state probably for about 20 years too. When I was at the Louisiana Department of Education, we partnered with TNTP on the Fellows Program. I also did some work with TNTP in the north of Louisiana in several parishes there on staffing initiatives. Currently, Julia and I work with a coalition of school leaders in the Baton Rouge metro area on talent practices. We have a strong presence in the New Orleans metro area. We've recently done some work in central Louisiana in Rapides Parish, and then also have a strong presence in the northern part of the state, again, focused on really building and sustaining a culture of high expectations for all students and adults. And then, as recent events have unfolded, we have adjusted and tailored our work to meet the needs brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this session, obviously, we'll talk about virtual recruitment and staffing. So although we've adjusted things, our focus has really remained kind of on these three key ingredients here. Is first of all, the way we work with partners is to gather and analyze data so that we are well informed on what the current state is, what the biggest challenges are, and what is going well. Based on that data, we make a series of recommendations for concrete steps to address those challenges, and we work in collaboration with our partners at the district or system level to implement those practices. Planning for next year as well as something that we've had a strong focus on in the last couple of months, obviously. A few things to point out there. Stakeholder engagement is key. We have a COVID-19 planning survey that several systems and districts in the state are implementing to gain actionable feedback from stakeholders, parents, students, families, community members, to guide their steps for next year. And we're also making or working with systems across the country to map out strategy for next year, including planning for the different scenarios that might be in place, and ensuring that schools are prepared to provide quality instruction in 2021 for all students. So I'm going to share a few slides on talent best practices, and then we'll dig in a little bit more specifically on preparing all teachers for next year. So first thing I wanted to highlight is that really we don't know what next year will look like. It probably is going to look differently, could look differently across the state. But these are a few scenarios that the State Department of Education put out in their Strong Start guidance. Schools could reopen in the fall as they historically have, with in-person instruction in brick and mortar buildings. Or there could be a blend of in-person and distance. Many students and teachers may not be able or willing to attend in person and would need to do some form of distance learning, so there could be a blended model. Schools may start the year with staggered schedules to accommodate distancing requirements, so you might have different grade levels start. And others have distance learning, and there could be rolling closures as a result of successive waves of COVID. So we really need to be prepared for all of these scenarios. And of course, the other scenario might be that schools open virtually. So these are the scenarios we need to consider when recruiting, selecting, and staffing for next year. And success and a strong start in 2021 really depends on school leaders and hiring teams acting now to implement strong strategies to ensure that schools are fully staffed and all kids get access to high quality instruction. And that involves acting now to build a strong candidate pool, making sure that compelling messages about your school are out there in different platforms to recruit a high volume of quality applicants and diverse applicants. Selection strategies in place so that you're selecting the teachers that are a best fit for your schools and for your students. And staffing processes that are efficient and quick to enable hiring to happen without obstacles, and also ensuring that new teachers, new hires, and current teachers are all prepared for this unprecedented school year. So a few things then on virtual recruitment specifically, and then I'll talk about selection and staffing. Again, this is at a high level. I don't think any of this is brand new to folks. I believe that certainly the folks that we work with in Louisiana are implementing a lot of this stuff. But it might be a case of finely tuning strategies and implementing more planning to ensure that everything's in place. But with recruitment, we recommend districts and systems start with aggressive goals and a process to monitor progress towards those goals, really focused on increasing the size of the candidate pool, especially diverse candidates and subjects that are hard to staff. Also building and enhancing internet presence and the use of social media to make sure that the messages are getting out to the right people, that the pool is diverse again, and that candidates can be hired early, and the pool is strong enough so that candidates can be hired early. Also, we recommend strengthening relationships that you already have with local and regional pipeline providers and HBCUs to ensure candidate pools are diverse. And then going beyond internet recruitment and social media recruitment, technology can be also used to do things like candidate referrals. This has been something that we've seen a lot of across the country, and something we recommend, but easy to implement. Candidate referrals can be as simple as putting a message on the recruitment page, asking current teachers to refer a friend, or reaching out to community organizations, being specific about positions that you want to fill, and encouraging those organizations to reach out to their membership to get folks to apply. So a little bit about selection. So in any environment, virtual or in person, we always recommend that selection of candidates, the teacher candidates, should be a multi-step process. We want to make sure that school leaders and hiring teams get multiple opportunities to view candidates and to ensure that the candidates that they're hiring have the right competencies. And so that goes beyond the usual interview. Obviously, there should be multiple steps to look at candidates. Obviously, you can use phone screens as a time server to narrow down the candidate pool and then conduct video interviews. I think you could also consider having candidates teach sample lessons to a panel of hiring team members to demonstrate competencies, and then provide feedback and ask candidates to reteach a portion of that short lesson. We also think that things like student data exercises and writing prompts, specifically now using scenarios from potential 2021 school year, could be useful. So you could key up candidates to consider what it might be like to teach part of their assignment virtually and some face-to-face, and based on their responses, you'd be able to evaluate whether they have the right competencies to be successful in that setting. Some other tips include virtual tours and open houses, giving candidates the opportunity to virtually meet potential teachers that they would be working with and get a sense of your expectations. And we always recommend involving students in the selection process wherever possible. One way to do this might be to do pre-recorded questions and use those in video interviews in a way that gives candidates exposure to the students that they'd be working with before they actually see them on campus. And finally, a few bullets on staffing. So timelines are the big factor in staffing and efficiency of timelines, making sure that schools are fully staffed before the first day. Obviously, timelines ensure that all members of the hiring team are on track and that you can adjust and be strategic based on where things are on the timeline. Recommend using or investing other folks into the process. So it's not just the principal, but the principal's working with the hiring team to maximize efficiency. Another thing that's probably pretty obvious, but orientation events for new teachers may need to be rethought. And I know many school districts across the country are doing this, but they're holding virtual versions of their orientation for new hires. And then lastly, we really have kind of emphasized the importance of preparing new hires and current teachers to return in 2021. New hires and current teachers, although current teachers have experience in your school, it's really going to be a new experience for everyone. And so we think there's a real value in listening and engaging in conversations with current teachers and new hires to make sure that you're cognizant of their needs and to ensure that you can really meet those needs and use those use that insight to inform action to ensure that you hit the ground running in August 2020. So I know that was pretty quick. We did want to spend a little bit more time digging into one aspect of this, which is preparing new hires and returning teachers. And Julie, I think I'm going to give control to you. So.
All right.
You've got it?
Yes. Can you, well, I don't know. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks, Andrew. So as Andrew indicated, we are going to talk a little bit about preparing teachers for next school year. And that includes both, any newly hired teachers that you might have. So kind of like a new teacher orientation, but also returning teachers, even if they're, 20-year veterans. they are, they're going to be entering a different kind of school year this year. So this is kind of a framework along with some next steps of how to go about creating a teacher preparation plan. So again, as Andrew highlighted, next year just holds a lot of unknowns for many different aspects. And one of those is just like, what will school even look like? Will it, remain closed and we'll be doing virtual teaching, learning? Will it, reopen as usual, but even, as usual really won't look like the typical school year or something in between? And, we don't know at this point, what is going to happen and how it will all play out. But regardless, teachers are going to be entering a new reality come the fall. And so, we were thinking, what are some of the things that will be different no matter what? And these are just kind of a handful of things, but there are many more. So one is that, teachers will likely be using different instructional methods and platforms, especially if we continue on the virtual route. Both teachers and students are going to be returning, either recovering from or still experiencing stress, trauma, financial hardship, lots of challenges. And then students, of course, many will likely have academic setbacks. There'll also, most likely be some increased safety measures in place, whether, that has to do with 6 feet of social distancing or otherwise. And then, attendance is likely going to change a bit, given that many students, teachers, and staff are, going to have underlying conditions, even if school does return, as normal. There will certainly be different attendance policies in place for those circumstances. So in thinking of how to prepare teachers and what they need, we're going to use this framework that we're stealing from Maslow. If you ever took Psych 101, you may remember learning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is what it looks like. And so the concept here is that as human beings, we have a hierarchy or, a pyramid of needs, and we must meet the bottom layer of needs before we can move up to the next layer. So, as an example here, you cannot be like focusing on or achieving self-esteem and, status, recognition, friendship, and family if you are struggling to breathe, or you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or you're not getting any sleep, or you don't have a safe place to sleep. So kind of thinking about like, what are, our bottom layer of needs that we must meet before we kind of move up to the next priority of needs. And we've adapted this to think about teachers and preparing them for next year. And so, you can see here that we've renamed these layers a bit to apply, but those basic needs are still the bottom level. And then we have expectations. So, what can teachers expect and what do you expect of teachers? Community, so, culture building, peers, management, what does the community look like? And then academic goals. So, however, percentage of students make X amount of growth on, Y test. Academic goals are higher up there. And then a professional growth plan. So, things like career development or certain competencies that teachers want to get better at this year. So today we are going to model what this framework looks like for basic needs and expectations. Just for the sake of time, we're not going to get to the top 3 layers, but we do in the appendix of our deck have detailed slides on those layers. And you can access that deck, I do believe, through the Sketch app. I don't know if I'm saying that right, so don't make fun of me if I'm not. But yes, today we're going to focus on basic needs and expectations. So basic needs. In a typical year, these are some of the questions that might fall under basic needs, thinking through, you know, what will teachers need, right? Like what materials, you know, how do they make copies if they need to, you know, where are the science lab materials, things like that. Important locations in the building that they'll need to know, teacher attendance policy, how should they dress, what's the calendar, what's their class schedule, things like that. But, you know, this is not a typical year and our basic needs are going to look very different. So we actually have a few ideas here, but would just love first to hear from y'all what comes to mind, what kind of questions when you're thinking about preparing teachers for their very basic needs for next year. And if you'll use the chat box to enter in your thoughts. And I believe Andrew is going to monitor that and let me know.
Yeah, attendance. Hard to plan attendance is like. I'm also seeing virtual platforms or on campus. Is it going to be on campus or virtual platform? Evaluations, attendance again, and grading. What are the expectations for evaluations and grading? More concerns about attendance and accountability. What about expectations for teacher duty? Students with social distancing, students can't be in the same area. So every teacher, there will be some considerations about that. Will teachers clock in, clock out when they're working from home? Will they hold office hours based on a normal course schedule? How will time be scheduled for planning time? How is that going to be different to the way it would be scheduled in a normal school year?
Yep. Yeah, these are all great examples, and a great example of the power of, you know, many minds, because not all of these we've thought of. So thank you for adding these. The questions that we thought of, I can, there we go. So how can we make teachers feel safe in a classroom environment? So, you know, I think Andrew, you said someone spoke to that. And, you know, that's teachers and students, but making sure that they feel, you know, physically safe to be there, you know, given the virus and what we know of it. How can we reassure teachers their position is secure? You know, over the summer, you might have teachers that there's just so much uncertainty happening right now. They might be wondering, like, am I even gonna have a paycheck come fall? And, you know, until they can really be sure of that, it's gonna be hard for them to think, you know, further down the road about, you know, academic goals for their students, for example. How can we assess, you know, how teachers are doing? And we mean that like physically from a health perspective, but also, you know, mental health and emotionally, and support their well-being. And, you know, there is a lot going on in the world and the country right now. This doesn't just apply to what's going on with the COVID-19 pandemic, but also with, the national protest and unrest over the murder of George Floyd. There's a lot going on in our communities right now, and people are in very different places and need very different things. So we want to make sure that we are assessing that and, reaching out and hearing from them, and acting on what we're hearing. And then lastly, from a technology perspective, how can we ensure that teachers have access to the internet, if they're at home and are in virtual teaching, and then any other technology that they might need. It is definitely going to be, a basic need that teachers are going to have met before they can, again, kind of start thinking about attendance and, academic goals and their own professional growth. So if you'll remember, the next layer on the pyramid of needs, the hierarchy of needs, we listed as expectations. And so we kind of mean what can teachers expect and also what is expected of them. So, in a typical year, we might be thinking, how often will teachers be observed? Who will observe teachers? And what will you look for? Expectations for student conduct and the consequences that are given for that, classroom management, student behavior, things like that, laying down the expectations. Some questions that we brainstormed for this year, are a little different. So what are the expectations for work hours? This kind of goes back to the attendance that someone raised in the chat. If teachers need flexibility due to childcare or taking care of an elder parent, what does that policy look like? What will make a teacher successful this year? That's probably going to look different next year than it has in the past, especially if we are in a virtual, completely virtual environment. But even if our students are back to school and as normal of a capacity as usual, again, it's a very different year. So what are we asking of our teachers to make their students successful? And along those lines, what competencies are we looking for and have those changed from a normal year? How will we evaluate teachers this year? I know someone in the chat mentioned that as well. And what expectations do we have for students, not just teachers, in terms of conduct and attendance? So wanted to share those first, but again, y'all have great ideas. So would love to hear from you. What's missing here? What else comes to mind when you think about expectations for teachers or for students even in the upcoming school year? Would love to hear your thoughts in the chat.
And I mentioned in the chat, there's a lot of overlap between the levels. So some of these things have been brought up already, but yeah, I'm seeing online instruction presents a different set of behavioral expectations for students that will need to be addressed. So yeah, how do you set expectations for online instruction? What's allowed, what's not? What are the norms for online instruction? I know in a session we did in Baton Rouge, it was interesting that someone had mentioned requirements thing to do with video. Is video an expectation? Should everybody be expected to be on video? There's a lot being said now about kind of fatigue of being on video on Zoom all day. I think we're feeling it. And what are the considerations for students there? Also, what are the expectations for students living in rural areas with no internet accessibility or less? Even in urban areas in the state, there are many families that don't have internet access, and so what considerations and expectations are in place for them? What expectations are in place or needed for parental consent and parental support? Sorry if my audio is in and out. Maybe that's better. Should there be different methods of grading virtual and online instruction? How can you set expectations for them? How will training be provided on distance learning? And what accommodations will be made for students that have no access to technology at home? Yeah.
These are great examples, and it's actually making me think of something I should have said from the beginning. But you know, these pyramid levels and the questions, you know, within them are really going to change, you know, school to school, school system to school system. So we definitely encourage you to, you know, make this yours and make it work for you, because you're so right. You know, the questions that are going to apply to teachers and students in a rural setting are just going to look so much different than an urban setting. And, you know, there's many other factors at play there as well.
And also just to make it clear that these are not, you know, all the answers, just a few that we wanted to share with you guys to begin to consider some of these things.
Yeah, definitely not comprehensive. Really just modeling a framework for kind of how to start thinking about this. And I saw someone say in the chat a little while ago, like, this is really hard to plan for when we don't know what's going to happen. And like, I totally agree with that. And I think the way to get around that is to do what we can now. And part of that is kind of like identifying, like, what are those key questions that we're going to need to be asking regardless of what scenario ends up playing out. And that way, when we learn from, you know, the powers that be what scenario is going to play out, then we know exactly, you know, we've thought through these different scenarios and what is important, what values and priorities we're focusing on. So as a next step, there we go. So, okay, a few next steps that we would suggest for creating your teacher preparation plan. So the first is to kind of go through what we just did, but with your team and with all of these layers. So, you know, we did basic needs and expectations today, but we only scratched the surface even of those layers. And then, you know, the top 3 pyramid layers, as I mentioned, there's like similar slides in the appendix. So feel free to reference those. But so that would be kind of the first step. And then from there, we would recommend using guiding questions like this, also in a discussion with your team. For each of the pyramid layers, asking, you know, okay, what do teachers need to know about what we've discussed for this? When do they need to know it? So that, you know, again, brings into play what someone said earlier about that we don't know what's going to happen and when will we. So kind of thinking through, like, okay, when is the right time to communicate this information? What activities, you know, resources and messages will you use? So is this an email? Is this like a full staff professional development session? What does this look like? And then how will you reinforce these messages? Because as we know, even in a normal setting, if you communicate something, it doesn't mean that it's always going to stick. And especially in today's times where there's a lot going on for everybody and we're communicating virtually, it'll be even more important to really identify how you're going to reiterate and reinforce the messages that you want to send. And then finally, as a way to make your teacher preparation plan more concrete, we'd recommend actually like mapping out the specific activity or strategy that you're going to employ, and, you know, the target date for when, who the owner, who is responsible for that, and then just like aligning on the purpose with your team. So a few next steps there for your team for preparing teachers, new and current, for next year. But again, we recommend that you make this yours because it's going to look different for every different scenario. And we also would highly encourage you to take advantage of your teachers and their voices. It's going to be really important to hear from them, like, hey, what are your basic needs? What kind of messages can we send? How can we support you? That will really help to inform your teacher preparation plan. And with that said, we are going to move into our teacher panel. We're very excited to have some teachers joining us today to share some of their experiences and insights. But first, I actually want to just read off a few statistics of what we're hearing from teachers nationally. This is from TNTP's COVID-19 survey, and these are just a few headlines from our teacher survey. So I hate to just read it out to you, but I guess that's what I'm about to do. So 63% of teachers know where to direct students and or families who have questions about their basic needs and welfare. 60% of teachers agree that they understand how to support their students' learning in a remote environment. 66% have the necessary resources to do that. And 69% are receiving support to implement effective remote learning. 66% of teachers say that they're getting the support that they need from leaders, and 65% are feeling connected to their school community. So again, just a few national statistics that we're hearing, but not nearly as impactful as hearing from the voices of teachers themselves. And so with that said, want to welcome our teachers. I'm actually gonna stop sharing my screen so that we can see all of our panelists here. There we go. Hi everybody. And I would love actually for y'all to start out by just introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everybody.
Yes. Go ahead, Augustine.
All right, cool. I'm Augustine Tambrini. I'm a teacher at Basis Baton Rouge. I've been teaching for 5 years and I teach first grade math and science.
I'm Steve Kalink. I work in the same school as Augustine at Basis Baton Rouge. I teach second grade and just finished my 21st year of teaching.
Terrence, are you still on the line? I saw you here earlier, but I don't see you right now. Okay, he might have gotten disconnected. And then just so everybody knows, we're expecting another teacher to join us. She had a meeting with a university leader until for another 15 minutes, but hoping that she'll be able to pop on in a bit. But for now, thank you, Steve and Augustine, for being here. We are looking forward to hearing from you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, hi. Yes. Hi, Terrence. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay. I do apologize. I think I was muted. I'm Terrence Grimes. I'm from Richland Parish School Board. I work at Dale High Middle School. I'm a 7th grade ELA teacher and social studies teacher. I have 13 years classroom experience.
Awesome. Thank you again, teachers, for being here. So, just to reiterate, I know that we've said this, but we really strongly encourage, stakeholder engagement from many stakeholders, families, community members, students, but teachers are such an important group, especially when it comes to subjects about themselves, like how to prepare them for next year and other things that they may need. So thank you for being here and kind of providing a start for district and school leaders to hear from teachers and what they might need. So to start off, I was wondering if y'all would just share a little bit with us about what your life has just been like the past few months, and what challenges you've faced.
For me, the biggest challenge has been doing my job from 8 to 4 with my own students and making sure I have 12-year-old twin boys, and making sure I could support them. I was lucky enough that my wife has been working from home the last couple months. So that helped, but that was a hard balance that sometimes I would be on a video call and just couldn't help the boys and give them the time they needed. And I'm sure lots of parents out there had that same experience.
One of the biggest challenges I face is that I have 3 children. 2 of them are college students, and 1 of them is a middle school student. And my wife and I both are teachers. We live in a rural area that is real countrified, for the lack of a better term. So internet use is kind of slow at times, and having to work remotely like that has been a big challenge. With my wife and I having to continue with online learning with our students, there was a big demand sometimes with meeting to the needs of my middle school daughter. But at the same time, when my college students were having to do their assignments and needed assistance, it posed challenges. So I can only imagine what students who did not have those types of support systems in place was like.
I think for me, the hardest part was really missing my kids. I mean, you can connect with them online, but it's completely different from being in the classroom, and all that little feedback that you get without really realizing what it is, that you're looking for, without having to plan and think about how to get that sort of thing, was really missing. And I think all those little informal assessments that you can do with your kids every once in a while was a huge part of how I structured my plan for the future. And missing that made it really difficult to make sure that I was on track, and making sure that I really had what I needed and could help and support the kids in the way that they needed to be supported.
And y'all all touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what just the virtual teaching experience has been like. To what extent is it happening, and just like what's your experience been?
One of the greatest challenges I faced with the shutdown was I have so many students who are being raised by a lot of elderly guardians. So their use of technology was limited. So when those students needed that additional support, oftentimes they couldn't get it readily as needed at home. And that posed challenges. It required a lot of intervention on my part virtually, trying to walk them through some of the challenges I faced. It was eating up a lot of my personal data time. So, the small things you think about that creates problems in the long run. I was fortunate enough that it didn't faze me much, but it does create problems.
I think for me, there were a lot of practical concerns that really had a large impact. Anything from kids whose parents were maybe first responders or working a lot, didn't have the support they needed, or things like, parents who didn't speak English very well, really transitioning to that virtual environment where most of the instructions they got were from emails and things like that, made it really difficult for them to understand what it was that they were supposed to do and help their kids like that. And then I think aside from all the practical concerns, there was also this question, but more of a philosophical question of what is it that grades really mean, during virtual learning? Am I really assessing how much my kids are learning? Am I really seeing growth that they've made? Is a bad grade reflective of their ability to, comprehend and understand, or was it that they just didn't have the time or the support or the resources to get what they needed? And sort of thinking about what school means now that it's in such a completely different environment, and how we can help our kids really change the way that we have to frame our reference points for thinking about even the simplest things like what an assessment is. And so I think, having such traditional views like concretized in how we see what education means really needs to change in this completely different environment. So I think that was a big challenge of just sort of wrapping our heads around that, both as teachers, administrators, and even as parents too, when they were so worried about what grade my kid's going to get really doesn't mean anything in this environment. So thinking about that and sort of changing the way that we approach that, I think was a big challenge. Hey, Steve, I think you're muted. I don't know if you're talking.
Sorry. So can y'all hear me now? What I was saying was there was to me, it was interesting to see that we couldn't, in the lower grades, we didn't have visual access to all of our students. We could connect with them all in teams, but only a certain number we could actually meet with and see them when a parent was present. And the other ones, it was just through audio. And there was a big difference in the experience in trying to reach that kid. Even when we could pull up some things like we could share documents and stuff, but when we couldn't actually see them, it felt like less of a connection.
Thanks for sharing, everyone. Also interested in, as you know, we just talked through a bit about teacher preparation. How are y'all preparing for next year and, the uncertainty that comes along with it?
I think we have a basis. I know we're prepared for several of the ways you talked about. And we've been asked to refamiliarize ourselves with all of our curriculum that we're teaching and be ready for any way to deliver it. So I guess we're preparing for all possible situations. And I guess the best way that they've told us to do that is really understand what you're teaching so you can adapt it quickly to whatever platform we use.
I agree with you. I know in Richland Parish where I work, we're providing both low-tech and high-tech options. We just launched our virtual summer school yesterday. So we're now in the process of meeting those needs, those students, as well as getting a dry run of what the school year may look like if we had to start back virtually. We're working out the kinks and we're trying to interact with those kids both ways, virtually and low tech with paper and pen packets.
Yeah, same thing as what they both just said. And I think also remaining conscious that whether it's, fully virtual, whether it's a mix, whether we're back in physical school, that the school year is going to look a lot different from a curriculum standpoint, that we might not be able to start at the same place that we normally start. And so thinking about how it is that we do a comprehensive review, how do we make sure that we are addressing any regressions that happened, beyond the normal summer slide, and how we take that into account when ramping up our curriculum and thinking about the pacing that goes on throughout the year from a completely different starting point.
And so when thinking about how you're preparing, what could you use? What would be helpful from school leaders in terms of resources, guidance, professional development, things like that?
I would want to be able to see all my students through video. That would be very helpful since I saw the difference. That's the one thing. I feel like we have lots of good resources, but to actually be able to see, they could always see us, but we couldn't see them. And to me, that would help so much if I could see all of them when I'm working with them. That's my biggest thing. Make that visual connection help so much.
I think it would also be nice to have some sort of professional development on specifically teaching online and what that looks like. We found out on Friday that school was closing, and then that Monday we had to already have developed our whole virtual curriculum. And so, filming lessons, putting it on YouTube, making YouTube channels, or using Teams, whatever it was that we were using, was all sort of very improvised. And I feel that a lot of teachers got really good at it and developed those skills, but it would also be nice to have a time where we can sort of take a moment and think about what is the best way to do it, not just, sort of surviving and making do how we can, but really learning how to thrive in a virtual environment. So having some sort of way to incorporate that as well would be really useful.
So when listening to what Andrew and I were talking about, as far as preparing teachers, what is your reaction, and what would you add for your advice of like what to think through as you're creating a teacher preparation plan?
I think a lot of the things that we normally think through when making our lesson plans still apply, thinking about differentiated instruction and the different learning styles and all that, but it just looks a lot different when you're teaching virtually. And so making a video that has different ways to reach those different learning styles is a lot more complicated than just doing it in person. And so I think that that's something to really keep in mind, is not only do we have to think about the form and the content of our lesson plans, but we also need to think about the context and the way that it's delivered, which I think is a big challenge, because it involves a whole other layer to our lesson planning that's already pretty in-depth and complex in itself.
You may be on mute again, Steve. Sorry.
Sorry, guys. So I was thinking about the burden that your lesson, while maybe really well intended, in terms of it being complicated or requiring materials, think about as a parent, will they be able to do this? How's it going to frustrate parents? And when those frustrations come up, can you take care of those frustrations by making adjustments? And when they do come up, how are you going to help those parents to do that? It's different now. Instead of kind of explaining why we do something, we really got to put our hands out and figure out how we can help them through it. Instead of saying we do it this way because, let's say, oh, we're going to make you successful. This is the way we're going to do it, which maybe we should have been doing it that way all along.
I think that's a great point, Steve. And that reminded me of something else, which is to think about what accommodations look like now, IEPs and 504s, and think about how those are implemented as well. And consider, it's almost like accommodations for parents, to think about, what help do they need in being able to provide, the lesson and help deliver it in the way that we have. They're sort of teachers' aides now that are in the classroom with us. And so thinking about how can we tailor that towards them is a great point, Steve.
And I see that Kenya, you were able to join us. Can you hear me okay? You might have to take yourself off mute.
Okay. Okay. Hey everyone, I apologize for being late.
Oh, all good. Yes, thank you for joining us. I know that you had a conflict. So to put you on the spot a little bit, well, would first just love if you don't mind introducing yourself, where you teach and what you teach. That would be great.
Hello everyone, my name is Kenya Grimes. I teach 8th grade ELA at Dale High Middle School in Richland Parish.
And would love to hear from you, Kenya, on what your experience has been like the past couple months, in terms of just as a human being and as a teacher and, a virtual teaching experience, and also how you are preparing for next year.
Okay, the 2 months after everything with the pandemic, I realized when I first started doing my virtual lessons, I had too much information in my lessons. And so I actually had to just break it down sometimes with just a slide, depending on what the topic was, because I realized the amount of information I was trying to present to my students was going to be overwhelming. Then I had taken consideration that they had other classes. So that was the #1 change I had to make. I had to adapt to, as you say, the virtual world as far as the type of material I was giving to the kids. And then once I started limiting the amount, because I realized less was more in the virtual world. And I started to, when I posted my lessons, I saw conflicts with the kids' schedule because they had their own little, you know, situations going on, because some of them were at home with, you know, smaller, you know, siblings, and they had to babysit, and I had to be very flexible. So that's probably the next thing I learned, being flexible and being understanding of the kids and what they were going through. Because, you know, I have a seventh grader at home going to the eighth grade, and just seeing her going through the different emotions and feelings. I knew the other kids were going through something similar, and I tried to take that in consideration. And the amount of students who were participating at first was a little discouraging. And I had to make sure I didn't let that affect, you know, my morale with the ones who were already, you know, coming, because I didn't know their situations. You know, did they have, you know, opportunity to do the high tech? But at our school, we had a low tech and a high tech option for the kids. As far as preparing, we're in summer school now, and I'm instructional coach for summer school, and facilitating or helping 3 additional ELA teachers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we're just getting in there, and if something pop up, it doesn't work, this is summer school and we're learning. And so I think this is just a good environment right now during our summer school to experience, you know, adding different platforms like Google Classroom, Padlet, Flipgrid. And this first week was getting to know. And that's one thing I would definitely add. If we have to be virtual at the beginning of the school year, I think that first week is going to get to know each other on a virtual platform. Because in the classroom, you know, you have face-to-face activities planned. So virtually, I'm definitely going to have some get to know you activities like we're doing for summer school.
Thanks, Kenya. I'm curious, you know, so y'all heard me go through kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm curious, as a teacher, and again, just as a person, how would you describe your hierarchy of needs? And just since Kenya, I know you weren't on that part of the call, so just to rephrase that a bit, what would you say you kind of like need first? Like what are your kind of basic needs before you can kind of like move on and start thinking about the next thing?
Honestly, right now, just making sure, because I have 3 children, and just making sure their needs are met before I can focus on, you know, my professional educational needs as far as what I have to do. So family is first with me. I don't, you know, that's just me. I have to make sure family is first, and then I can, you know, start meeting the needs of what my district and my school needs from me.
I feel pretty good about just the way the school year has. Obviously, it hasn't gone great, but as far as like my needs as a teacher, I think our school's done a good job of asking me what I think the best way it is to do things, and that helps me get to the top of the pyramid. Like when we struggled the first week, we were terrible. I think that we had some parents getting like 60 emails. You know, if you had and that's just for one grade level. So if you had 3 kids, you're getting well over 100. But I thought our school, it helped me to get to that top of the green during this a little bit is because they wanted to know how I thought we could fix it for 2nd grade, and how as a 2nd grade team we could fix it. And that really helped me feel good about a job. I felt really empowered after that 2nd week that I could make some really positive change with this and take things in a direction that were more personal to me, and that at the same time could help other people. So that's how I felt like I was climbing that pyramid, by getting that support to make decisions that that I thought the best way was to help.
Yeah, I really agree with Steve. I think for me, one of the most important needs is balance. We were lucky that we had that communication with our admin team, but we also didn't have, you know, a full staff and faculty meeting every day or something like that. So we had the time to work on what we needed to, with also knowing that everyone who needed to be available was available to us, and we had that support. And so looking at that in terms of, you know, time is now a much different resource than it was when we had a structured, 85-minute block with our classes each time, or 50 minutes or whatever it is. Now it's a little more free flowing. And so I think it requires a different way of approaching how we use and most effectively use that resource. And so I think that the balance is a big one for me, and communication in general and knowledge. Hopefully just knowing what the situation is going to look like will help me plan a lot better. And I know that's not necessarily up to my district leaders or anything like that, but the more knowledge we have, the better, obviously. So I think that's a priority as well.
Thank you to you all. Those are all such great points. Kenya, I think most people are in the same boat, that it's like we all are trying to do our work, and our work is important, but we're in a time where we got to make sure that we're looking out for ourselves and our family first. And I definitely feel that personally. And Steve, you really brought up for me that it's just like it's going to be really important during this whole process to like continuously check on like how things are going, because I think we're all going to plan for our teachers next year and for our students, but like surely it won't be perfect. And so it's like, what is our plan for assessing how things are going, and making adjustments and adapting from there. Thank you so much to our panelists, and I actually want to open it up for questions and answers from our other participants, or I should say questions from our participants and answers from our panelists. So feel free to ask a question in the chat box, or if you like raise your hand on Zoom, then we can unmute you and you can ask your question aloud as well.
And Julie, a question from me. How do you raise your hand on Zoom? Is it the reactions button at the bottom?
I don't know. I'm not sure, actually. I think I was just told that that's like a mechanism that people could use. But if that's not a thing, then if y'all will just type your question in your chat. Oh, look, a hand raise. I see it.
Yeah, it looks like Melissa has a question.
All right. I'm going to unmute you, Melissa.
Hi guys, I don't have a question. I was just going to share with you how to do the raise hand if that wanted to help anybody. Definitely no question.
Yeah, how do you do it, Melissa?
You go to participants, and then you find your name, which is usually at the top. And you see all the names, and just say raise hand right there. And then I'm going to lower my hand right now.
Got it.
All right,
Thank you, Melissa. We appreciate you. This transitioning to virtual is a learning curve for all of us, apparently. So thank you.
Saw an interesting point in the chat, and there's some chat going on now. But Julie Alexander mentioned that the most helpful thing to her would be to have very specific learning schedule and a plan of delivery times, clearly defined curriculum with accessible materials to make sure that everybody is kept on track academically. So that planning and specificity about schedules is something that we've heard a lot. So thanks, Julie, for that. And Carla, you, I believe, thanks for that. I'm glad you thought the hierarchy of needs was helpful. Again, just a framework to think about this, but I think that you've all been given access to that slide deck, so you've got that. But also want to point out, you can see I think Julia and I have our contact information on as our names, andrew.vaughan tntp.com and julie.pearson at tntp.org. Feel free to contact us for resources like this chart or other planning guides, virtual resources. We're very happy to share those with you. Maybe give it another minute to see if anyone else has any questions for the panelists or for us, actually. And we're also modeling flexibility in these difficult times. And if everyone's good with it, we can also give you 10, 15 minutes time back. But again, thank you so much for participating in this session.
All right, well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our teachers for your insight. And please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care. Bye.